I experienced this when I was 10 years old a long time ago. My family and I were visiting our first cousins in Minnesota during the July 4th tournament. It was the first time seeing them in a long time. They fled from Laos along with my parents when I was still a little toddler. My aunt and uncle had a son that lives there and was around my age. We got along well together, joked around, and played video games. Then on the third night, we were playing a game of truth and dare with my younger sister and his older brother and sisters. They were 2 to 3 years older. I was up and picked dare. My cousin dared me to go into the basement with the lights off. They say they sometimes see a Hmong lady in red down there, and she comes up some nights. I was young and was already scared and refused to go down to the basement alone. Later that night, while everyone was asleep, besides my aunt and uncle because they were still up doing opium, I slept on the living room floor with two of my other cousins while my sister slept on the couch. My parents were sleeping in one of the rooms upstairs. I just couldn't sleep because of the smell from the opium. All of a sudden, I noticed the doorknob on the basement door rattle, like someone was trying to turn it. With just the moonlight shining into the living room, I could clearly see the doorknob slowly turn. The basement door squeaked as it slowly opened. That's when I thought about what my cousin said about the Hmong lady in red. That's when I saw her stepping out around the door. She looked like a young woman in Hmong clothes, maybe in her 20s, and she was glowing transparent red. She walked by the couch where my sister and girl cousin were sleeping, just looking at them. Then the lady in red noticed me. I was frozen in fear. I didn't know if it was real or if it was just a dream. The lady saw me looking at her and started walking towards me as she came around the corner of the couch. I didn't see her feet. It was as if she was floating. Now she was 5 feet away from me, getting closer and closer. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't yell for help, and I couldn't move. As the lady in red was about 2 feet away from me, my mom turns on the light, and the Hmong lady in red just vanishes into thin air, like a magic trick. She was gone. No sight of her anywhere. But before she vanished, I saw her face as she turned her head around and back, before my mom turned on the lights. She had this sad yet angry look on her face before she vanished. My mom came downstairs to talk to my aunt and uncle before we left in the morning. The next morning, I told my aunt and uncle and my parents about it. You know how adults usually tell kids. It was just a dream, or we were just imagining things. But inside, they know what we saw. I am in my mid-20s now, and I can still clearly remember how she looked like. There was one really old Hmong couple that had no kids. Since they didn't really have anyone to take care of them, they were always short on money and didn't have any money for an AC during the summer. One night, the man told his wife, since it was so hot, then they should move the bed right under the window and open the window so it wouldn't be so hot while they slept. The wife agreed, and they moved the head of the bed right beneath the window. As they were sleeping, the lady felt something touching her face. So thinking that maybe it was just bugs, she just whipped her face with her hands trying to get WA. It was to buzz off. Then again, she felt something touching her face. She did the same thing once again. A few moments later, again she felt something touching her face. This time, she was ticked off and tried to grab WE was touching her face so she could squash it. As soon as she caught it, she noticed it wasn't a bug but felt like a small hand. She opened her eyes and noticed she was holding onto a little hand that came from outside the window. She kicked her husband, and as he awoke, he witnessed what she was holding. A little in shock, he immediately looked outside to see if there was anyone right out by their window, in case it was a burglar. What he saw was nothing but a really long arm that came from the woods, which was about 20 feet away. He immediately told his wife to let go. As soon as she did, the hand shot back like a rubber band back to the forest. He told his wife what he saw, and immediately they freaked out and shut the window, being forced to stay up all night. The old folks said something about how you aren't supposed to sleep like that because it meant you were welcoming the dead to come sleep with you or something. That was why the hand was bothering the old lady, because it was searching for an open spot to come sleep. Everything was great when my husband and I first moved into the new apartment in Fresno, California. We were finally getting our life started. We just moved out of the in-laws, not saying I hated living there, but it was finally the real deal. Living on your own, paying your own rent, buying your own food, and etc. I've always been the very independent type, so it was exciting to get that kind of freedom back. Anyways, our apartment was small. The door opens to a small square-shaped living room with a huge ocean view window. To the right is the kitchen with a small dining area. Once you entered the living room, straight ahead of you is a short hallway that leads to the bathroom and bedroom, one-bedroom apartment. The whole apartment flooring was a pale wood, except the bathroom and kitchen, which was a floral tile. The window panes were painted red. The apartment was small but cozy, and a good place to start off our life. Plus, I liked how the apartment was a little further away from the usual busy areas of Fresno, more towards the farm areas, outskirts. When we first moved in, my father-in-law came and did a cleansing in the apartment because he's a very traditional Hmong man. Not saying that I'm not. For a matter of fact, I'm also very traditional, but I didn't think much of it because the apartments were pretty newly built, 2 to 3 years old. After my father-in-law left, my husband and I spent a couple hours digging through our boxes, but once I grew tired of not knowing what to put where, I told the husband to take me to the store to get some furniture to put things on. We left and went to the store for a good 4 to 5 hours. It was dark by the time we got back, so we showered and immediately went to bed. Slept on the floor, of course. The next morning, my husband left early for work, so I decided to go move some of the boxes into the kitchen and dining area, so that when the delivery guys got there, I can just have them set up whatever we needed them to. But as I was moving the boxes around, I kept noticing long strands of hair on the ground, and some on and in the boxes. It wasn't enough to be noticed right away, but as I moved more and more boxes, I realized that it was pretty much spread throughout. I knew for sure it wasn't mine, because I actually had a short A-line cut during that time, and of course my husband had a clean cut. I didn't give it much thought because my sister-in-laws were helping us pack during the time we were moving out, and they both had pretty long black hair, so I just thought it might have been theirs. Since we left the window open last night, we live on the second floor, the wind might have blown the hair everywhere. After I finally finished moving the boxes and swept the floor, I went into the bedroom to put away our blankets to make room for the bed when it arrived. But as I was folding the blankets, I also noticed long strands of hair around the bedroom, but mostly right around the corners of where we slept last night. Honestly, I was a little freaked out, but decided to brush it off and just quickly sweep the room. Later that night, when my husband came home, I brought up the subject to him, and he just shrugged it off and also suggested that it might have been his sister's, which somehow comforted me a little, and I just left it as is and left for work. I worked night shifts. A couple days later, I got up around noon, because I work late, when my husband had already gone to work. I decided to finish unpacking and maybe go out to do a little grocery shopping. While I was cleaning and unpacking, I also noticed strands of long hair laying around the floor and furniture. This time, there seemed to be more. I quickly went and checked the bedroom and also noticed the hair inside the bedroom again. Then I went and slowly checked around the corners of the hallway and kitchen, but didn't notice any more hair than 1 or 2. Finally, I went into the bathroom, where my husband and I get ready in the morning. But there were only evidence of our own short hair. I even went as far as checking the bed and pillow for hair because if our hair is falling out that much that it's filling the living room and bedroom, I kind of figured most should be on the pillows or bathroom. But once again, I only found evidence of our short hair. It was only a strand or 2. I tried not to think too much about it and quickly finished cleaning and mopping the whole apartment corner to corner, then left for work. By the time I got off work, I completely forgot about the events in the morning because I was exhausted from a long night of work and just wanted to get home and dive into bed and sleep. The whole apartment was dark when I opened the door to enter, indicating that my husband was probably asleep, so I decided not to turn on the lights to distract him. Instead, I turned the flashlight on my phone and guided my way towards the bedroom. I was planning to quickly grab some clothes, shower, and just get into bed. But as I opened the bedroom door, from the small amount of light coming through the window, I can make out the bump on the bed, my sleeping husband, but my eyes were quickly drawn to a silhouette of a woman standing beside him on the bed. The first thing that came to my mind was that he was cheating on me. So I quickly reached out and turned on the bedroom lights. I was ready to pounce on my husband. But right as the light came on, the silhouette figure suddenly disappeared right before my eyes. I felt a deep drop in my heart, and my body suddenly grew weak. Before I knew it, my knees started shaking uncontrollably. I knew what I was feeling, and it was pure terror. My husband quickly jumps out of bed like he was out of breath, and looked up at me like he was surprised to see me. I don't know if he even noticed the fear on my face, but before I can say anything, he jumped out of bed and flew into my arms, shouting, "Onk, thank you, honey, for waking me up. I was having the worst nightmare ever. I couldn't move my body and like I was being sat on." What my husband said to me terrified me even more. But I decided not to say anything to him or scare him anymore, so I just quickly brushed the fear off and told him to go back to sleep. As I laid there in that bed that night, all I felt and heard was the pounding of horror in my heart. For sure, when those lights came on earlier, I believe that what I saw was a long-haired, pale female woman towering over my husband, with her eyes rolled back and blue dead tongue hanging loosely at the side of her mouth. This is based on a true story back in Laos. Back in Laos, when Hmong people were still wearing Hmong clothes, a sister and her sister-in-law went to the farm early in the morning, each of them wearing 2 zav, the silver plaits around the neck. When they got to the farm, the SIL told the sister to go pick cucumbers from the top of the hill, and SEL herself will go pick cucumbers from the bottom of the hill. The sister did as she was told and went up the hill to pick cucumbers. Once her back basket was filled with cucumbers, she returned down to the spot that her SIL directed her to go uphill and called downhill to her SIL. She called, "SIL, is your back basket full yet? If it's full, come up and let's go home." But there was no reply. She called a few more times, yet there was still no reply. Fearing something had gone wrong, she quickly set her back basket down and rushed downhill to check on her SEL. When she reached downhill, her SEL was nowhere in sight, but next, a tree stump was her SEL's back basket filled with cucumbers. Next to her, SEL's back basket was one of her SEL's shav. She scanned the surrounding again, checking to see if there has been any struggles within the area, but noticed no difference. More downhill, there was a small river. So the sister thought to herself, maybe her SEL went down to the river after picking cucumbers to wash her hands. So the sister decided to go down to the river to look for her SEL. But after about 10 steps forward, the sister saw the other zav of her SEL. By now, her heart started racing, but she quietly told herself to be brave and ran all the way down to the river. Once she reached the river, she called out to her SIL again, and once again there was no reply. Now she was really scared, so she turned back and started running up the hill, grabbing both her SIL's zav as she passed them all the way to her own back basket and put it back on, and rushed home. When she reached home, she told her parents and Xiong, the brother that married her sister-in-law, what had happened. Xiong quickly went and gathered about 15 to 16 men in town to go look for his wife, each man carrying guns and knives in their hands. However, after a whole day of searching, there was still no sign of his lost wife. Night started covering over the hills. A couple of men started saying, "It's getting dark and we can't find any sign of her, so let's go home and return back tomorrow to look again." Crying, Xiong replied, "No. We are men here with knives and guns. There is nothing to fear. We should continue this search till we find my wife." Although most of the men wanted to leave because they were starting to feel chills, seeing Xiong crying, they felt bad for the man, so they decided to continue the search with him. But the deeper they went into the woods looking for Xiong's wife, the more chills they started feeling. With each chill, goosebumps started rising on their fleshes, and their heartbeats started racing. About 10 minutes later, Xiong heard his wife's voice echoing in the air. "Xiong, I'm over here. Come over here." Xiong turned to the rest of the men and said, "I hear my wife calling me over there. She said she's over there. Did you guys hear it too? All the men now stopped dead in track and glanced at each other. They shook their head and replied, "No, we did not hear anything." Before Xiong could say anything else, he heard his wife's voice calling him again. He looked towards where his wife's voice was echoing from and pointed ahead. "My wife is calling me from ahead, so we are going to move ahead." Before anyone could stop Xiong, he pushed on forward. Hearts racing faster and fear beaming on all the men's face, they trailed closely after Xiong. 5 minutes later, everyone, including Xiong, stopped dead in track again. For this time, they all heard Xiong's wife's voice ranging in the air. "Xiong, I'm over here. Come over here." One of the men noticed the voice was too close to them, so he quickly said, "Your wife sounds very nearby. Let's get our guns ready." Everyone started pulling bullets out of their pockets and stuffing it in their guns. As Xiong reached into his pockets for his bullets, he pulled out instead his wife's ring. By now, Xiong's heart shook with chills as he said quietly, "This is my wife's ring. She wore it this morning. How did it get into my pocket?" Upon hearing this, everyone now shook with fear of what was going on, but they pushed forward. However, after 3 to 4 steps only, they saw on the ground in front of them Xiong's wife's dead body, which was torn and eaten all by something. The only parts left were the head connected to half her neck and left shoulder to her arm. By now, night had covered every inch of the woods. One of the men turned to Xiong and said, "Now that we have found your wife's body, it's too dark to do anything, so let's cut down some wood and bamboo and make treehouse above ground to rest. When morning calls, we will take your wife's body home for burial. If not, we will bury her here tomorrow morning because her body is not a good sight to bring into town anymore anyway." Everyone agreed with the man that said this, so everyone quickly helped chop down trees and bamboos, and by 11:30 managed to make 3 tree houses. Once everyone was up in each treehouse, they could still look clearly down at Xiong's wife's body on the ground. By now, it was around 12:40ish. Xiong's wife's head started turning to look at everyone and smiling at them. Even though they were all men, seeing this sight made them feel lifeless. After Xiong's wife's head turned and smiled at everyone, it turned back to its dead position and laid still again. Now the man that told them all to make the treehouse directed that no one is allowed to go to sleep. They are all going to stay awake and see what's going to happen next. An hour later, Xiong's wife's head turned again and smiled at them. This time, her hand, too, raised up as if pointing to them. By now, some of the men peed in their pants without shame. Another man in the group thought for a while and said, "It looks like she's trying to tell someone or something that we are up here." Once those words were out, everyone started shooting guns down below around Xiong's wife's body. Another man said, "This is too scary. We all have to man up and stay till dusk. We are not going to take her body home. We will just bury her here." After talking about it amongst themselves, everyone agreed. By 4 in the morning, they climbed down, divided the men into 2 groups, a group to dig Xiong's wife's grave and a group to guard the surrounding. They managed to bury Xiong's wife's half-body. Before leaving, Xiong kneeled in front of his wife's grave and cried, "I loved you so much when you were alive. Why did you treat me so nasty now that you are gone? Is it because there is something or someone I cannot see forcing you to do this to me? No matter what, even though you scared me like this, I will love you always. Our life together will end this way. Sorry I'm not able to take you home with me." After that, everyone came home, and the story of Xiong's wife echoed throughout town. This story was first told by one of the men that went with Xiong that day, and since then it has been passed down generations after generations. I was 7 or 8 years old when this happened. During the time, we were coming to Thailand from Laos. I wasn't quite sure exactly what I saw, but I thought it was weird. Anyhow, while we were in the jungles of Laos, we passed through a burial lot that was still pretty new. There were red and green sashes hung around the area. Some of the old folks said to not look at the cemetery and just pretend it wasn't there, or the spirit will follow you. I was scared, so I held my mom's hand tight and tried not to look at the cemetery. Even though I tried not to look, as a kid you're always curious, so I snuck a couple peeks at the cemetery. At first, I didn't see anything, but the second time I saw a little Hmong girl standing next to the cemetery looking at us as we passed through. I didn't think anything of it because it was just a girl. I didn't look back to see if she was still there when we passed through, but had a strange feeling like someone was following us. My mum and I were somewhere in the middle of the pack, so I asked my mum, "Mum, did you see the girl at the cemetery?" She said, "No. Did you something when we passed through that cemetery?" I told her that I saw a Hmong girl standing next to the grave. She then asked if I sensed the little girl's presence, and I told her yes. She told my dad that there was a spirit following us. That night, my dad slept with me. He used some branches with leaves covering my face as a blanket. He told me not to remove the branches, and if hears someone call my name, to not answer it even if it sounded like my mom's voice. I shook my head, yes. Then I knew what was going on. While we were sleeping, my dad held my hand. On the other hand, he had his Hmong knife wrapped in a red sash. He said, "Remember, if you hear someone other than my voice, don't answer." I shook my head that I understood. That night got really cold, but I wasn't cold at all. I could see somewhat through the leaves, and everyone was shivering. I heard a girl's voice calling my name, but I didn't respond to the voice. Then I heard my mom's voice calling me, and I almost answered it, but I remembered what Dad had told me. All of a sudden, all the men got up and sounded a little girl that no one recognized. Everyone had their Hmong knives wrapped in a red sash out and approached the little girl. She started to cry and wailed so loud it was deafening. She said looking for her brother and mother. The men didn't care. They surrounded her, then started stabbing her. I could see the blood coming out of the little girl's body. Once the little girl was dead, the men started to chop her into pieces. Then the weirdest thing happened. All her body parts transformed to animal-like body parts. The men said this part of the forest was haunted. Many kids and women went missing through other journeys that went through here before. After that night, I didn't feel the little girl's presence anymore, but my mother got really sick and passed away by the Mekong River. My dad had to make a choice who to save, his only son or his wife, and he chose me. My dad remarried once we got to Thailand and was happy again, but as for me, I lost my mom. I kept having reoccurring dreams of her visiting me. In my dream, my mom said the little girl wanted me to be her brother, and my mom to be her mom too. One day, I told my dad about my dreams, and he said she also was visiting him in his dreams. She was very angry at him for killing the little girl because she was the spirit of my unborn sister. The look on his voice explained it all, the pain and anguish of losing his wife and his unborn daughter. Later on in the week, we converted to Christianity because my new mom came from a Christian background. After that, my dad and I never had any more dreams of my mom. I still wonder though, what if I had answered the little girl's voice? What would have happened? Back in the days when I was in Laos, I heard that if you ever see or hear something strange, just keep moving forward and pretend you didn't see or notice them. During this time in Laos, I had some hearing loss, not totally, but enough to where I need to face you directly to be able to understand what you're saying. When I was about 13 or 14, I went out with my older cousin during the evening to check out some girls in the next village. On our way to the village, my cousin told me to follow behind him, so I did. He said, "If you see me run, run. If you see me creeping, creep. If you see me hiding, hide." I agreed. I asked him why I must do the things he does. He said, "The road we are traveling is haunted, so we must move quickly. If he sees or hears anything, we must detour quickly." I was scared, but I told him I wanted to go, so he and I went on this adventure. As we went on to this little village towards the east, there was no problem. We met two nice girls who were just about to prepare dinner. They invited us to have dinner with their family, but we declined. We asked if it was okay for us to see them later. They agreed to come out and talk with us. I was happy, but my handicap was so shameful since I wasn't able to communicate well with the girls. I let my cousin do all the talking and laughed when he laughed. It felt awkward being there and not saying a thing. One of the girls asked my cousin why I was not talking, so he said, "Because when I was young, I was stung by some wasp in the ear." The girl felt so sorry for me, so she came and sat next to me. But I was shy, since this was the first time a girl noticed me at all. I tried to gather up some courage and carry a conversation with her, but everything that came out was yes and no, mostly head nodding. She did most of the talking for the both of us. By the time I knew it, it had gotten very late. My cousin was still talking to the other girl while I was sitting next to this girl I liked very much. I finally got enough courage to tell her my name and ask her for her name, and if it was okay for me to see her again. She smiled and said yes. I asked her if my handicap made her think differently of me. She said, "It's my heart she wanted, not my ears." I was so happy. It was getting close to morning, about 4 a.m., and the roosters were beginning to crow. We said our goodbyes. On our way back, I was following my cousin closely. All of a sudden he started to run, so I ran after him. Every turn he made, I followed exactly how he told me to. We came to a crossroad, and there was a lady dressed in black standing there in the middle of the road, looking southward. My cousin stopped, and we hid behind a big tree. He put his hand to my mouth and whispered to me not to move or make any sound. We watched through the leaves, and the lady started to walk towards our direction. My cousin made sign language for us to hide underneath the leaves and let her pass. I could feel my heart pounding and the hair on my arms and neck rising. As we laid underneath the leaves, we could see her pass by. I could barely see her face, but I knew she wasn't human. We just lay quietly and watched her go down the road. Instead of going back on the road, we detoured through the woods and found a different path home. My cousin and I were scared. My cousin said, "Did you hear her calling your name?" I said, "No." I thought he was joking, but he looked serious. He said, "Did you tell those girls your name?" I said, "Yes." Then he said, "Never ask for a girl's name or tell her your name out in the open." I was young and stupid. I didn't know what I was doing, and no one taught me all this. When we got home, he told my dad that we saw a demon calling my name on the road. My dad went and fetched a shaman right away. The shaman said, "We need to change my name, or else the demon will find me. Then I'll get sick." So right then and there, the shaman made a doll out of straws and tied my shirt onto the doll and said, "The person you seek is no longer here, so stop bothering us." The shaman and my father took the doll to a cliff and threw it off the cliff. Later that week, I heard that the girl I was talking to got really sick and died. Even though my name was changed, I kept seeing that girl in my dreams. Sometimes the dreams seemed so real, like she was right here with me. In my dreams, I knew it was only a dream and asked her to stop coming to see me, but she said she wanted me and only me. I told her I'm too young and still irresponsible, but she said she loved me so much and that she'd always be with me. In my dreams, she was so beautiful and so wonderful, but I knew she was dead, so I tried my best to persuade her to leave me alone. She would cry, and it made me sad to see her cry. Once during harvesting time, I was tired, so I went to sleep at our farm hut. I could have sworn I saw her vividly in our garden. I got up and scanned the rice field, but it was only my imagination. I was kind of scared, but I had to be strong and pretend what I noticed didn't happen. I continued gathering the rice into piles. My dad said, "Let's go home." He came to me and said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You look pale." He then asked me if something happened to me today. Then I told him that since the last time the shaman came to our house, a week after I started having dreams of my dead girlfriend, earlier I saw her in our rice field. He got his Hmong knife and raised it over my head and said, "Leave my son alone. You are now in the land of the dead. My son is still alive, so please leave him alone. I don't want to harm you, so show us some respect. If you truly love my son, then leave him alone." When we got home, my dad went to fetch the shaman again. We went to the village where the girl was living. We went to her house. It was abandoned. We gave our condolences and killed a pig as an offering to her. Her family no longer lived in that village. After she died, they moved to another town to be closer to her dad's relatives. Ever since we did the offering, she never came to see me again. In 1986, we came to the US. I'm no longer deaf. Turns out I had a bad ear infection, and with a cochlear hearing implant, I'm doing great. I always wonder what if I had heard that women calling my name would, I have died like that girl. I guess having hearing loss was a blessing in disguise. Victor awoke, mouth a dust bowl, brain a tape rewound too many times, ancient. A hangover, mythic, the kind that warps existence, livers beg for mercy. Something reeked, rancid whiskey, stale cigarettes drowning in coffee. Maybe him. He rose, a war vet from slumber, dragged himself to the desk. The manuscript, a perfect stack, as if night delivered. A murder, pre-written. Did he write it? Yes, surely. Or so he willed himself to believe. He grasped it, flipped through pages, not before snorting some coke on it. A bomb. The bomb. Meta-narrative apex. Noir, a book-writing reality. An author, discovering he's written. If there existed something grander, more shattering, more perfect, Victor knew not of it. A bomb. A fine meta-narrative delirium. I'd take it to the fair. The fair buzzed, words evaporating, books no one would truly read. I wandered stalls, manuscript throbbing beneath my arm. I'd leave it in the right place. Someone would find it. Then, reality would shift. A reason for being here. Or so I'd told myself this morning, before sun and 4 beers derailed logic. The manuscript. Right. I'd left it somewhere, lost in this bubble of people, words, nothingness. Now, beyond his control. Good, but who cared? Whatever. That was not the point. Things happen only if we make them. Or they happen, but as something else. I'd brought a manuscript, a mark, a ripple in the system. But was I the ripple? Was the manuscript a decoy, a distraction from a greater question? What the hell was I truly here for? The crowd moved, slow, broken voices merging with heat. Blurred faces, details popping at random. A ring too tight on a swollen hand. A perfume trail, out of place. Was it real? Or it was me seeing what I wanted? Hunter S. Thompson said, reality is angle. It shifts if you think about it too much or too little. And I stood where certainty unraveled. Maybe I'd just brought a book. Or maybe I'd written himself into it, unaware. Victor had brought a manuscript to a fair. Or so he'd told himself that morning, stuffing printed pages into his backpack. An experiment, a meta-narrative game. Leave it, abandoned among the right people, see what unfurled. But now, under blinding sun, 4 beers churning, a sense of otherness gnawing at his neck, he wondered if the manuscript was ever the point. He'd walked the stalls, titles meaningless, conversations fading like cigarette smoke. The manuscript, gone, beyond his control. Things happen only if we make them. Or they happen, and we invent reasons after. As he thought this, his phone vibrated. The name, a jolt. The guy, the one he was to leave the manuscript for, the one he'd missed. But now, he wrote. Victor stared. Then the message. Hey, weird, someone mentioned a manuscript. Was that you? Heart skipped, imperceptible. Who told him? Had someone found it? Or was the manuscript always there waiting to be seen? A cursed object activating only when gazed upon. Victor ran a hand over his face. He couldn't recall leaving the manuscript. Had he? Or was he imagining it now, reshaping the past to fit? Action or thought? Sunburned, crowd shifted, a broken machine. Maybe the manuscript never existed. Maybe he'd written it all this morning, in half sleep, where reality is soft, malleable. Or maybe he hadn't written it. What if he was writing it now? The idea slid into his mind. Slick, a creature. Was he living in real time what he'd already written? If the manuscript spoke of him, here now, wondering if the manuscript spoke of him? He looked at his phone. Typed, erased, typed again. Yes, I think I left it there. Or at least, I want to think I did. He sent the message, felt the weight of the phrase. Want to think. Why? Closure? A role in a story that might not exist? Or because, deep down, he knew everything happens twice. First in the mind, then in reality? Or vice versa? He closed his eyes. Heat, alcohol, the crowd's hum. Hunter S. Thompson said, reality is angle. It shifts if you think about it too much or too little. Phone vibrated. Another message, the guy. Curious? The manuscript speaks of a guy leaving a manuscript at a fair. Are you messing with me? Victor felt a plunge. He read the message again. The manuscript spoke of this? He sat, beer in hand, opened the manuscript. A glance, just to check. He flipped through pages until a paragraph exploded in his eyes. Julio's descent into madness mirrored the city's crumbling infrastructure. Victor froze. Julio. Heart missed a beat. Who the hell was Julio? He flipped pages, frantic. Read the paragraph again. Ink seemed to move on the paper. The name, there, always there. But he didn't remember. Did he write it? Number? No, this part, not his. Couldn't be. Hands sweated. The fair's noise, muffled. The manuscript, changed. Or was it always like this? And he saw it only now. What if Victor wasn't Victor? What if he was Julio? Number nonsense. Calm down. Find the murder. He flipped, skipped pages. The book, about him. He knew, felt it. Each line swallowed him, the plot twisting like a burning page. Then he found the passage. The body lay on the fair floor, amidst stalls and voices. No one noticed the murder at first. The victim's phone vibrated, a message unread. Look behind you. Victor's eyes widened. The description. There. The book spoke of him. Phone vibrated on the table. Victor didn't want to look. Fingers moved on their own. Screen lit. A new message. Look behind you. The story written, and he choiceless. The more I read it, the more I thought it had potential, but suddenly a horrible doubt came to me. The manuscript I left there. Was it the one I thought I had written, or was it another? A text that described exactly my day, the present moment, this conversation. If someone had opened it, what would they have found? A detailed narrative up to that exact point, up to the reading of that message. I took the phone with sweaty hands. I wrote, "Can you send me a photo of the first page?" The guy saw it, remained silent for a few seconds. Then he replied, "Better not." I felt my heart stop for a moment. What did it mean? Then another message. "Look at page 47. I froze. My hands trembled. I opened the manuscript to page 47. Victor. His room. The awareness that the book was about him. But it was impossible. Victor had written that scene. Or was he Julio? My blood froze. I scrolled through the text. The protagonist realized, line by line, that he was not reading the future. He was creating it. If he continued to read, the murder would happen. But if I didn't read, my eyes fell on the last sentence of page 47. Victor raised his head. He felt a breath behind him. A hand brushed his shoulder. The blow came dry, precise, inevitable. Victor didn't want to turn around. And you're still reading. You shouldn't. But now it's too late. Someone has died. Of this, I am certain. I know it because I always know it. As I lie here alone in this big, empty bed and listen to the rain, I remember it as it returns to me. This feeling, this dread, skittering up and down my throat with 1,000 little legs. It settles in my stomach like a great stone, a solid, sickening weight. It is rancid in its heaviness and unmistakable in its familiarity. Someone has died. I do not know who. I sit up and I take a long breath, pulling my legs out from beneath the covers so that they can dangle above the hardwood, cold where I press my feet. The remains of chipped red polish color my toes. I had intended to paint them this week, but I could not choose a color. I have been told that I am bad at making decisions. too nervous to choose the wrong one. But I do not think that is true. Someone else has simply always been there to make them on my behalf. But I will make one now. I will call my daughter, I think. I move for the end table to retrieve my glasses. They sit crooked on my nose, and I push them back into place as I look at my cell phone, plugged into the wall there. I wait for it to ring. I stare. I expect it, but it does not. I had told my husband, at one time, that we should keep the landlines, one in the kitchen and one in the bedroom, for hurricanes or when the power goes out. But there was no point, he had decided, no point when we had a family plan, which was expensive. But sitting here now, maybe there was a point, I think, and maybe I had not insisted hard enough. A person cannot silence landline phones after all, not really, not the way they do mobile phones at night. Maybe someone has called me already, someone with the most awful news, and I did not hear. Connie does not have a landline either. She may not even answer now. Or worse, she may no longer be able to. I shudder, picking up the device. No missed calls. I turn on the sound and begin to flip through my contacts, squinting in the dark. Connie will answer, I think, and she will be upset that I woke her for nothing. She will say that the children are asleep and that she just checked on them. Howard is out cold beside her, and yes, she is positive, sure, 100% certain that she can see the rhythm of his chest, up and down, up and down. He is breathing, and he has work in the morning. And so, I really should not bother them so early. There is nothing to worry about, and she will visit me soon. And we will get our toes done together, the pair of us. It must be the storm, she will say, the storm riling me up. Connie has always thought I worry too much, though, and maybe I do. I place the phone back down. I will not call her, I think. I have nothing to fret over. The phone has not rung. No one has called. And they always do it so tactfully, in hushed voices, as if the most terrible part of the announcement is the waking, the "Oh, so sorry for disturbing you, ma'am." I stare at the phone again. I wait. It does not ring. I hover a hand over it, but I do not pick it up to make the call. I should not disturb her, but someone has died. Of this, I am certain. My father died when I was 6 years old. I first felt this peculiar nauseous feeling, the sensation of knowing, as I lay in a bed much smaller than this one, with a delicate white metal headboard wrought into the shape of flowers. I awoke and stared at the ceiling, taking a long, laboured breath and pulling the heavy comforter up to my chin, just as I always did to fight off the wind that could fill that room in the winter months. It rattled the windows, and it rattled me, shaking my very bones as I rolled over to look at the little toy chest across the room. It had been gifted to me by some distant cousin when I was very, very young, too young to recall the party, but it had sat there for as long as I could remember, as if it had always existed right there alongside me. It now sat properly shut for the night, but that was when the sensation came for the first time, this indisputable, terrible stone in my gullet. Softly, as not to disturb my parents, I pulled myself upward to sit atop the mattress, and crawling to the floor, I crept inch by inch across the room, my hair dangling over my face. I paused above the toy box, and I stared down at it. And for reasons I even now cannot dare say, I opened the lid. I do not know how my father got inside, but I saw his bulging, bloodshot eye staring up at me in the dark, the rest of his swollen features obscured and buried by the clutter. A baby doll, whose own hinged eyes have broken, forever open. A spinning top, a velveteen teddy bear, an assemblage of blocks. My father's eye looked up at me from beneath them all. It blinked, and at last he said my name, his voice hoarse, a hollow, splintered noise uttered through unseen lips from the very depths of his ravaged throat. The worst noise I ever heard. "Cassie!" I ran, and from the upper railing, my face placed flush between the wooden rods, I found my mother standing in the front hallway, clad in her checkered nightgown. She wore her hair in curlers then, and pressed up against a dark wallpapered wall, she stared at the telephone in the alcove by the door. She stared, and I stared at her staring, and I know now that she knew like I know. But most people can tell, I think, even if they do not realize it. They pick it up in the chilliness of the air, in the lateness of the hour, in an unnatural flicker of a piece of fabric. These tiny signs that something is amiss, that the universe has shifted. They create in a person with enough sense to see, a terrible, sinking, heavy feeling. And finally, the phone rang. Sometime later, my mother found me huddled by the doorway to my bedroom. I did not dare go back in, but I had retreated there to cower after a few minutes of listening. She smoked a cigarette as she told me, a nervous habit people still did around their kids then. But I already knew, of course. I knew that my father had died. I learned later, not from my mother, that a towering industrial shelf in his warehouse had collapsed, and he had been buried by its contents. And I had found him just like that, entombed in my toy box, some grotesque phantom vision caught, like a crude, blurry snapshot of the moment of his death. But he was not there when my mother closed the chest again that night, and he did not return. The feeling, however, had been there, this terrible sensation of knowing, the awareness of a death. I had felt it then, and I feel it now. I really should call Connie, I think. I pick up the phone, and as I look down at it, my finger hovers over the lock. But I do not press down. I should not bother her. Instead, I tuck the device back in place, and I rise from the bed. I rise, and as if compelled, I move for the closet, the mighty wooden armoire perched right beside the window, where the rain still patters. I stare at it, and I reach out a hand, but I hesitate. I hesitate because I think that if I open it, I might find someone staring back, a rotted spectre come to visit because perhaps it did not know where else to go. I do not deign to know the motives of decaying ghosts, and I still, even now, do not know why I saw my father that night, only that at his funeral I cried because they had once again put him in a box. And maybe that was it after all, the soul's search for a box in which to be put, now that its fleshy container had loosed it. With a bracing breath, I grabbed the golden knobs. I should go back to bed. I should not open it. I should not open it because if I do, I may regret it. But if I do not open it, I will have to sit here and wait and stare at the phone until it begins to ring, which I, of course, know it will. And so, closing my eyes and rearing back my head so that I might not have to look, I grasp the handles, and I tug. I tug, and the armoire opens, and I dare not peek. I count to 3 in my head. And in the very back of my mind, I can see Connie now. Think of her as a child, in a red dress we had bought her for Christmas. I should like to remember her that way, I think, not how I remember my father, not as a faceless, blackened eye in a box. I turn back my head, I take another breath, and I open my eyes. I see clothing, and only clothing, a closet full of patterned blouses and dresses I have so few opportunities to wear. But I will have to pick something now, in black, for the services, I think, for whichever one I will have to attend. Not that one, though, but maybe this one, I decide, reaching out to run my fingers along the edges of a dark, collared dress, with silver buttons down its back. No, maybe not. Reaching into the armoire again, I pull out a dress with a low waist, a black rose stitched on the hip. I could wear it with the long silver chain my husband bought me, I think, the one with the silver charms. But maybe that would be too garish, too bold for such a grim occasion. No, I think I could wear it with my mother's pearls. They are more understated. I had known it when she died too. But she had not gone suddenly. No, not like a lamp abruptly turned out before the dark. Her own end had come gradually, like the waning glow of sunset, bit by bit, until night could be the only natural, expected conclusion. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon that day, when I had been folding laundry, the weight of knowing in my stomach. The hospital had told us to go home and to rest that morning and that they would call if anything changed. But something had indeed changed before they decided to tell us. I wandered into the kitchen that day to find Connie already with the telephone's cord jumbled around her elbow. And I knew for certain. I should call Connie now, I think. I should have her check on Howard and the children. No, it would wake them. They would be upset. And really, it is just as likely to be a co-worker or someone from the church. These thoughts bring no comfort. But still, wrapped in them like a terrible frayed quilt, I reach into the closet once more, shifting through the row of heavy clothing in search of the long-sleeved dress with the belt. I will wear that one to the funeral, I think. It might be the proper choice because I had worn it to my husband's funeral. I was alone in bed on the night Richard died. He had been working late, as he so often did, and I had fallen asleep early, with the television on, lulled by the lullaby of commercials and rain. I awoke, as if from a nightmare, to find an infomercial about a countertop grill just starting to loop. The feeling once again took hold as I rolled over to check the alarm clock, blinking red. And I lay there for a good long while, watching my phone, curled up in a ball beneath the covers as some sports star extolled the virtues of sleek design, grease traps, and easy cleaning. The phone rang at 2:27 in the morning, and it was on the third chime that I felt a sudden shift in the bed beside me. A ragged, heavy breath ghosted my ear, hot and garbled, the way a person chokes, and the familiar weight of an arm stretched over to wrap round my shoulder. The exhaling came then, again and again, a steady, laboured noise rattling in some phantom throat. But I did not dare turn around. I wish now that I had, but I did not. I stared forward. I did not blink, and I picked up my cell phone, plugged into the wall there. Hello? There's water in the car, Cass. Oh God, there's so much water in the car. I let out a long breath at Richard's voice, distorted by static, and all at once the bed was empty again, and only silence was ringing in my ear. A police officer told me a few days later that his little silver Ford had been caught in the sudden storm and that he had swerved too hard around a bend in the road. He had died from the collision when the vehicle hit the water, they had said, and the drop was too high for any other possibility, of course. So at least he did not drown, something said to me as if it were a genuine comfort, and he had not been conscious to see the water filling his car. They did not find his phone. Oh, God, I should call Connie. I cannot take this anymore. Turning from the armoire, I move once more for the bed, for my telephone still plugged into the wall, perched there on the end table. I stare, and it rings, and I scream. I can recall, even from where I am now, that it was a full, horrible noise, hurled from the very depths of my stomach, as if I were finally letting that terrible great stone out, the one that had been sitting there within it. It echoes from the very core of me, but I do not answer the phone. My neighbor, in the apartment next door, is a nice young man. He has shaggy hair and an earring, and he checks in on me from time to time. I stir him from sleep with my wailing, and he will, a few moments from now, come to knock on my door. I do not answer because I'm picking up the telephone to see that I have missed a call from Connie. And shaking there in my dark bedroom as he knocks, I decide to dial her again. My neighbor will call the police. He will tell them that he heard me scream a little bit after 3 in the morning. And he will tell that same story still, for many, many years to come, whispered around darkened tables and across the occasional campfire. The police will call Connie, and she will tell them that she had been lying awake all night herself, tossing and turning with a great, heavy weight in her stomach. She will tell them that she had called me when she could no longer bear it, but I did not answer, even though her own phone will ring a few seconds later. She will answer it to hear only her own name, she will say, uttered desperately through a flurry of static. But there will be no record of that call, and they will not believe her, citing technical glitches or tricks played by fear. And when they break down my door, they will think I had fallen asleep with my armoire doors open and my glasses on the floor. I had not, but they will find me just as I found myself, blue-faced, breathless, covered still by the mound of blankets in my own empty bed, where I had lay for many motionless hours by then. Someone has died. Of this I am certain. Someone has died. And oh God, it is I. I watched Edna Powell die last night. I sat at her bedside and held her thin hand as her breathing slowed. I watched as her eyes became fixed and glazed, and her skin became pale and waxy. I leant forward and put my ear to her lips as the remnants of her final breath whispered. The death rattle signified the end. I let go of her cool hand and put my stethoscope against her chest to listen for a heartbeat that I knew was not there. A life had been lived. I stood up and took one last view of the scene before me. Taking a deep breath to ground myself, I stepped out from behind the privacy curtain and dimmed the light as I made my way to the duty station across the passage. Dr. Bobat answered after 4 rings. "Yes?" he said sleepily. "Sorry to wake you, Dr. Bobat. It's Sister Turner from Ward 3B. I'm afraid Mrs. Powell has just passed away." "Edna Powell? Really?" he asked, sounding surprised. "I really thought she would hang on for a few more days." "So did I said. "I noticed she was struggling when I checked on her half an hour or so ago, so I increased her oxygen flow and sat with her." "Ah, bless you, Christine. She was fortunate to have you with her. They certainly don't make nurses like you anymore." I smiled at his compliment. "Shall I notify the family? Please? And could you draw up the death certificate? I'll sign it in the morning during rounds." "Will do, Doctor." I disconnected the call and fetched Mrs. Powell's file from the pigeonhole marked Bed 12, just as Avril returned from the tea lounge. "What's up?" she asked. I told her about Mrs. Powell's demise. "How sad. Such a sweet old lady. I really thought she would have been with us a few more days." She passed me a notice of death form from the top drawer. It wasn't unusual for people to die on our shift. Ward 3B was where they sent patients who had exceeded all their options. Many of these were do not resuscitate patients for us to take care of and make comfortable in their final days. Edna Powell had been one such patient. End-stage bowel cancer. I picked up the handheld and dialed the next of kin listed on Edna Powell's file. Her daughter sobbed quietly as I reassured her that her mother had not been alone and had passed away peacefully. "Thank you, Sister Christine. You have no idea how comforting it is for me to hear that you were with her in her final moments." She opted not to come to the hospital, preferring to remember her mother as she had been in life. "I understand. Many families make that choice," I said gently. I explained that somebody would be in contact with her in the morning, with a list of funeral homes and details for collection of the death certificate. I reiterated how sorry I was for her loss. "You really are incredible, you know," Avril said as I hung up. "What do you mean?" I said, picking up the form. "Just the way you are with people. I don't think I'll ever get used to telling people their family member just died. You just do it so calmly and flawlessly." 20 years on the job, I sighed and wrote 11 hours 23 next to time of death. Avril notified the mortuary as I quickly completed the rest of the details on the form. When I was done, she went to check on the other patients in the ward, while I returned to Edna Powell's silent room to prepare her body for the afterlife. Her oxygen mask lay where I had placed it on her pillow so as to keep her final breaths unfettered. I disconnected the oxygen and her drip bag and removed her venous port from her hand. My hands looked almost red against her translucent blue skin, which was colder than it had been earlier. Dropping the mask, port, drip bag and tubing into the red incineration bin, I listened to the familiar jingling of the equipment falling onto the used medicine vials. I opened an antiseptic swab and began wiping her face and neck. I didn't wear gloves. I preferred it that way. I rolled her frail, cancer-ravaged body onto her side and untied her hospital gown. Working quickly, I cleaned her front and back, then placed an absorbent pad beneath her pelvis to catch the fluids that would soon drain from her body. There was certainly no dignity in death. Finally, I positioned her thin arms close to her sides to make it easier for the undertakers when rigor mortis set in. Once Edna Powell's corpse was cleaned and positioned, I leaned over her face and peered into her lifeless eyes. "Goodbye, old lady." I closed her eyes with the palm of my hand. I was startled by Avril's voice from behind the curtain. "Need some help?" "All done," I said quickly, pulling the sheet over Edna Powell's face. The rest of the shift passed relatively uneventfully. The porters removed Edna Powell to the mortuary. Mrs. Johnson needed a sedative to help her sleep, and Mrs. Jamal needed additional pain meds, which I administered from the Schedule 7 cupboard, documenting it carefully in the register. I took my tea break on the third-floor balcony adjacent to Ward 3B. As I watched the sun rise serenely over the sleeping city, I thought about how today the world would be different because there was one less person in it. At 7 o'clock, I left Avril to do handover to the day staff and fetched my bag from my locker. I scanned my access card and took the elevator to the ground floor. Taking the long route out the hospital, I turned left down the hallway where the Employee of the Year awards were displayed. I paused to look at a framed photo of a younger me, Cinta Christine Turner, RN, Employee of the Year 2018. I smiled to myself. This is why I do what I do. On the bus home, I gazed out the window and watched people starting their day. The city was waking up as I was about to sleep. I thought of Edna Powell, now permanently sleeping. Death is a strange concept. We always say, "Rest in peace." But do the dearly departed really rest? Is peace not just the end of suffering? When it came to Edna Powell, I knew the answer. Despite my long shift, I felt invigorated thinking about the role I had played in her passing. I had held the hands of many people as they took their last breath and passed to the other side. While most of them had been expected to die, not one of them had been ready to die. Each family, every doctor, had been grateful for me having been with the patient as they took their final breath. In fact, I had been told that it was my empathy with terminal patients and their families that had led to my Employee of the Year award. I exited the bus at my stop and briskly walked the short distance to my apartment. I couldn't wait to get home. Pushkin was waiting for me and curled his fluffy tail around my leg, meowing as I closed the door behind me. I turned on the kettle, dished up his breakfast, and watched him hoover it up. "I got another one," I whispered to him. I went through to my bedroom and closed the curtains. I sang to myself as I changed out of my scrubs and showered. 10 minutes later, I climbed into bed with my tea, took out my cell phone and clicked on Photos. I had been looking forward to this moment all night. I opened my most recent photo and saw the dead face of Edna Powell. Her mouth was open. Her lifeless eyes stared, unseeing, from my screen. I swiped to the previous photo. Edna Powell stared back at me, a look of fear across her face. This was taken right after I had injected a massive dose of beta blockers into her port, along with enough insulin to fell a horse. I had needed her to die quickly before Avril returned from her tea break, but not before I told her that she was about to die and photographed her horrified response. I had even turned the lights up and removed her oxygen mask to get a better photo of my subject's expression. No, she had gasped weakly, the fatal chemical cocktail already taking effect. I switched back to the dead Edna photo and enlarged it with my forefinger and thumb. I made it so large that the entire screen was filled with her dead eyes. "Gotcha," I whispered. I chuckled to myself as I toggled back and forth between dead Edna and live Edna. After a few minutes, I moved both photos into the folder where I had stored the pictures of the others who had come before Edna Powell. I had built up quite a collection. All of them had been expected to die, and none of them had required a post-mortem. I, a revered nursing sister with 20 years' experience and an Employee of the Year award, had written natural causes on their death certificates. I had laid out their bodies and had sent the evidence for incineration. I put my phone on charge, turned out the light and rolled over. I killed Edna Powell last night. My sister has always had a soft heart. Soft as sweetbread. She cried after the old woman, despite everything. Maybe because of everything. I remember holding her as she wept, both of us covered in soot, her fingers scalded from holding shut the oven door. After the tears, she was quiet. She trailed me through the awful house with its sweetbread walls and sugared windows. I found the clothes we'd arrived in, offered up her kirtle, and she donned it without a word. She showed no whisper of response when we found the treasure in the attic, only nodded vaguely when I asked her to help me fill up the few bags we could easily carry back through the woods. Maybe it would be enough. Enough to keep us safe from our stepmother's whims. I do not want to go back there. It was the first she'd spoken in hours. I hesitated outside the witch's cottage, looking back over my shoulder at her. I do not want to go back to them. I sighed. Nor do I. But where else can we go? She wrung her fingers together in front of her skirt, eyes downcast and her teeth digging into her lower lip. Eventually, though, she nodded. Fine, you're right. She looked back at the house. Wait 1 minute. There may be something left in the kitchen. The kitchen? I repeated in horror, but she only nodded. Yes. She did not think I paid attention, but I did. I know which of her potions might be useful. If nothing else, we can sell them when we get back. I nodded slowly and followed her back into the cottage, though I stopped in the open arch that led into the kitchen itself. She moved easily through the space, reminding me painfully of just how long she had been under the witch's thumb while the horrid crone tried to fatten me like a prize hog. She collected some dozen bottles and vials, tucking them carefully in between the bolts of silks and satins we had pilfered from the attic before returning to me. Let us go. Though there was no trail this time, she seemed to know her way through the trees. I asked how, once, when we paused to wait out the dark. But all she said was that she simply knew now, as though the forest spoke to her in a way it hadn't before. I felt the first thrill of fear at that, but I knew that she was still so scared herself. I refused to let her see it. I tried to coax her into dreaming about what sort of life we might have with the witch's pilfered treasure, and managed to earn a wan smile for my efforts. But it was cold and dark, and soon enough we simply huddled together under a gnarled tree as we waited for the deepest part of night to pass. When greyish dawnlight began to filter through the leaves, she was the first to stand. She had gone quiet again, and only answered me with faint hums or single words as we continued on our way. She seemed more comfortable to be leading us now, but something in the set of her shoulders reminded me of something. Something I could not quite name. Eventually, I lapsed into her silence. When the trees broke apart to reveal the familiar shape of our father's home, she froze. Then she broke into a run, and I was only half a step behind her. The door was already opening when we reached the stoop, and our father met us with his arms open and tears in his eyes. He held us close and apologized, over and over, praising the Lord's name. I embraced him in turn, but alongside the relief in my chest, there was an anger in my gut. It had started a spark, but over the length of our trek back through the woods had grown into a steady flame. I met my sister's eyes over our father's shoulder, and a chill ran through me. If my anger was a flame, then hers was the dead cold of darkest winter. Our father explained that our stepmother had been stricken ill not long after we left. She was in her room now, asleep, and had been for days. He did not expect her to recover, though he had been following the physician's orders as best he could. Perhaps she shall rally to see you, he offered us hopefully. When neither of us answered, he sighed and dragged a hand down his thick beard. There was more grey in it than I remembered. I know you must be angry with me, with us, he told us wretchedly, that I could lose track of you so easily. It is an unforgivable failing in a father. Lost? I started slightly at the sharp edge in my sister's voice. Our father did too. She had always had a soft voice to match her heart. We were lost, she repeated, staring at him intently. Our father stared back, eyes wide with a hint of fear. Lost, he confirmed at last in little more than a whisper. I dropped my eyes, unable to continue looking at him. My sister did not. Abruptly, she stood from our small table. We will go see her then. I blinked, startled both by the sudden movement and the conviction in her voice, but I followed her into our stepmother's sick room. That flame of rage flickered a little higher in my chest, and I found that I could not make myself move more than 2 steps inside the door. My sister knelt beside the hateful woman and smoothed a hand over her brow in a gesture so tender it made me want to break something. Here, she tipped one of the witch's vials against her lips. This will help. I almost reached out to stop her, but as though she sensed the movement, she held a staying hand back toward me. When the vial was empty, she stood and brushed her hands down the front of her skirt. She did not look at me as she left the room. I hesitated a moment longer behind her, staring at the woman who had left us to the wood and the wild. Already, her breathing seemed easier. Anger and love for my sister warred, twin flames in the center of my chest. She had always borne such a soft heart. Our stepmother was awake and lively within a day. Though shocked by our return, she was mollified enough by the offerings of treasure we had stolen away with that she simpered and even summoned up some mockish tears through which to tell us she was so sorry we had been lost to the wood. My rage burned hotter, and my sister grew colder. "We should celebrate your return," our stepmother exclaimed, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, but no other sign of her illness remaining. "What do you wish for supper, my darlings? Sweetbread?" I jerked around to stare at my sister, eyes wide and mouth agape. She did not so much as glance at me, but I felt her hand take mine under the table. She smiled at our stepmother, and my throat went dry. "But you are still recovering, stepmother." "I feel quite well, all things considered." "I shall make it," she offered gently. I could have stopped her then, could have clutched her hand in mine and dragged us out. We could have taken the treasure and left. It had been foolish of me to think there was nowhere for us to go. We might go anywhere. Seeing our father again, hearing him refuse to admit what they had done, made me sure of that. But my sister looked at me, just for a moment, and the ice in her gaze froze me to my chair. She was not looking for permission, but I nodded shakily anyway. Our stepmother exclaimed what a good, kind girl she was as she moved into the kitchen. Soon enough, the cloying smell of the baking sweetbread hung thick in the air. It was all I could do not to gag. My sister served the plates while the bread was still steaming gently, even drizzling the last of our honey stores over our parents' portions. "We can always get more at the market now," she said, with a hollow little laugh. Our stepmother agreed happily, though our father hesitated a moment before doing so himself. He was watching my sister with a faint wariness as she took her seat beside me. "Go on then, let us eat." They did. We sat in silence. It took our stepmother first. A faint cough, a furrow in her brow. She looked up with confusion, which changed quickly to a horrified realization as she stared at my sister. "You—" Our father choked, red spattering his lips. I looked away, squeezing my sister's hand tight, where she had once more taken it beneath the table. We were desperate," he strangled out, reaching for her pleadingly. "I did not want to. She made me." My sister shook her head. "You let her." He collapsed forward onto the table, his breath a wheezing rattle that grew fainter with each passing moment. Our stepmother tried to lunge for us, but her legs gave out and she sprawled across the floor. A scarlet trail, like candied jam, trickled from the corner of her mouth. "You," she gasped again, glaring balefully up at my sister. "You, little witch." They both began to convulse. I buried my face in my sister's shoulder. I could feel her stroking my hair. Even without raising my head, I knew she did not look away until their last breaths had faded into silence. Then she simply stood, her hand still in mine. We were both silent as we gathered up our bags, still unpacked by the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening. "You are afraid." I swallowed. Yes." She smiled at me, squeezed my hand again, and all I felt was cold. "You do not need to be. I will protect you." My sister has always had a soft heart. Soft as poisoned sweetbread. The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window. the colour of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then two. The radio echoes static. The body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw, the nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off-centre. The skin like a rain-licked plastic bag. The stink of musk and sulphur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful, even like this. Your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard yard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts. Until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed, staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now, the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon grey of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk, a prank gone too far, the wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation, but all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees, the dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life, and the Marcuses were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects and jasmine bubbles. Strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green, dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the showerhead and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit, and you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that. I don't even think I felt a thing." But she says it through lips the colour of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea-brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl. The way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf, like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea. the gaping hole in her chest, but she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer and iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk and then think better of it, press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bed sheets twice, eggshell white, no, grey with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. "Do I disgust you?" she says. "No." She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. "No more than I always did." "You need to sleep," you say. "Baby?" She tilts her head to one side. "Sleeping is all I've ever done." The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger's street with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never two built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up. Blousy dresses with sleeves like a nun's. Thrift store necklaces noosing your necks. Shoplifted lipstick which she hid beneath her mattress, more wax than pigment. But in the citrus peel of streetlights, in the low trill of distant music, the two of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window, a song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close, but it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk, and sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze, and you said something like, "I think I should go home now." And she said something like, "Have another drink." And so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, "You're so pretty." And you said, "I think you should stop." And she said, "Just let me say that one thing." And you wanted to say, "Stop fucking looking at me like that." And you wanted to say, "I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind." And you wanted to say, "Let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth." Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk. "I'm going home now." The body lays with her back to your bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the grey skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. A lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. "You still can't even look at me." Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. "Why am I here, Bet?" "What's it for?" There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. "You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love." You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. "Don't tell anyone," you say. "Did you want it to die with me, Bet?" She shifts, and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. "Were you glad it was silenced?" "Don't tell anyone," you say again. She sighs, lays herself back down so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket, the onset of grey-green decay wreathing her jaw. The smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. "Who could I tell?" She brushes your hand. "I'm not really here." And suddenly, you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire, and you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand. You put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost. 2 years ago, I stared into the eyes of a little dead girl. She was sprawled on some highway, deep in what used to be the Midwest, her dead, fermenting eyes staring past me, and up, 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 into the sun-bleached sky. They didn't leave many bodies behind when they left. Didn't want to find skeletons when they came back, I assume. Her skin was dark and leathery. There was a hole growing in her cheek. Blue tendrils came twirling out of the rotted, bony mass with those little orange tips. I wished they were green. I miss the trees, the grass. The closest thing to nature are the dead bodies with the synthetic viruses, eating themselves towards the clouds. Puny, fingernail scratches on deep blue skin. She might have been dead for 3 months, 6 at a stretch. The first thing I felt when I saw her was excitement. She was the closest thing I'd seen to another person in 6 years. My father's body had been more pristine, less infected by the now, a perfect conservation of the then. There was only the tight, red little hole in his temple, the pool of dark, sticky blood pooling around bits of his brain, staring at me like a sick, foaming, red-furred dog. His eyes were stained red by blood, and they sat uncomfortably in their sockets, dislodged by the force of a bullet tearing it all up behind them. He was smiling, a slash of red teeth, red eyes popping. I half expected them to flick towards me, half expected the revolver, still lying loosely in his palm, to fire a matching shot through my own temple. I was relieved when he killed himself, as I was when I saw the dark hole in that little girl's cheek. I took the gun. I took his shoes. I turned around, and I left. As I reached the crest of the yellow hill, I looked back at him, lying like roadkill on the highway, in the dead, yellow grass, our truck lying upside down, smoking, a few feet away. I wiped blood from my forehead, and I pressed on, the sun belching like a toad white bubble of heat that burst around me periodically. There was a similar gunshot in the little girl's calf that poked out from her purple nightgown. It was the nightgown that made me vomit. I heaved onto the tarmac. I heaved, and I heaved. She was so young, the same age as me probably, when I left my father's corpse to rot in the fat white sun that turned the sky grey from its heat. It happened in the night, I thought, sitting on the tarmac, staring at the little dead girl. There were faint, sun-baked faint tire marks on the road. She had gone, I thought. So young. She died, seething with red-hot pain, alone in the inky night. Not an inkling of who she once might have been. The sun was rising, the sky was losing her blue. The pile of vomit to my side would begin to cook soon, like a stinking goose egg in a frying pan. I stood up. I looked at her once more, a china doll, cracked up and fading in the sun. I turned my head back to the road, the tarmac melting into a black puddle on the horizon. It had been the last wink of winter that day, or what would have been winter. My diary says so, March 3rd. It's almost definitely wrong. The last time I was really sure of the day, the month, the year. I was 9. The day the school caught fire and burned down. The village burned for a week. The school was first, a black plume into the purpley grey midday sky. The grass was already threadbare, yellow. The buildings were lazy, wooden shacks standing crooked, haphazard, peeling rows like a pile of matches. It's difficult to build, gather materials, do anything at all, when you swelter all day under a rock or in a shack, waiting for the midnight hours. The village burned, and then Grandma picked up bleach on the exodus, and soon everybody was gone, my father on his way. That day, after seeing the dead girl, I had collected enough gas and food to wait out the summer in the caves. They were damp, dripping places if you went down far enough. It stank of rotted bodies, those who had starved or gone. But it was cool. It was dark. It was safer than third-degree burns and snarling tumours all summer long. I remember I'd left it so late that I knew to stop driving and lie in the grass under the car. I usually passed out from the heat after an hour or so. When the sun was lower in the sky, orange and red, the sky green and pink, I poured water over myself, guzzled it through my cracked bleeding lips. And then I drove and I drove. I'd left it so late, so dangerously late, that towards the end of the journey, they started appearing in the sky. Small black dots at first, but they got bigger. They're ships, full of, I don't know, probably scientists in grey coats, watching, waiting for everything to die so they could start again. They're nothing but black pebbles in the sunset to me, and they disappear in the safety of the night. Black pebbles, no windows, no movement, no noise. They've no exhaust fumes, no visible sign of life. They just float calmly in the sky, black beads, watching as Earth eats itself like a coyote starving in the desert, picking at its own ribcage for morsels of its fleshy stomach. A stomach long gone. That little dead girl was a premonition, I suppose. It had been a silent, dissociative half-decade of white, silent heat. Each year dripped onto my lips like the last of the water in the hip flask I dangle, now, as I speak, above my head. I should have been gone for the caves days ago. I stand on the roof of a gas station. It's midday. The sky is clear and grey. The yellow-brown plains sprawl outwards, forever on all sides. The highway cuts a black line down the middle. There's the occasional lone ranger, a telephone post in the distance, the hollow carcass of a tree. It's silent. So silent. Silence as deafening as a red sea, crashing down on my shoulders and burrowing into my dry, blistered throat. There's blood leaking from the blisters in my cheeks. It starts to boil slowly, etching teary burns down my chin, down my neck. I don't feel it. I don't feel anything. I'm a pair of eyes. I forgot the cave long ago. I've been waiting for this day, the last day of winter, the last wink. I hold my arms outstretched. From somewhere far away, much bluer and greener, much louder, if I squint, I can feel them burn like an old photograph on the campfire. The sensation starts to feel like rain, cold and relieving. I bleached myself intentionally. I went to one of the rotted bodies deep in the caves. A man. In the torchlight, his eyes were milky and half-closed, his mouth slack. There was a bottle of something that had rolled away from his right hand. There were foamy remnants on his lips. He reminded me of my little brother, Jeffrey. Maybe if he had grown up in the green and blue world, then he would have looked like that. I kissed his forehead. I began to forget not long after. It was sweet. It was like falling slowly asleep. From this nightmare. This fucking nightmare, I hear myself scream from far away in the blue and green. I start to turn away now, as my legs begin to give out on the roof of the gas station. I can feel nothing holding out his hand. The blistered now is a universe away. Just before I turn and walk down the hill, the rain pouring onto my neck, blurring my vision into a sweet, comfortable grey, expansive, eternal grey, I see that little dead girl lying on the highway, sprawled out on the scorched earth. I smile as I slip away. I smile at her red, unblinking eyes.